Welcome to the Lowdown Podcast, the show where we dive deep into the topics that directly impact the evolving originator. Now, I'm your host, Connor Bartley, bam! And today I've got Dylan Latour joining me. Now, Dylan is someone that has really gained my attention on LinkedIn as an influential writer. And listen, guys, I thought it was important to have him on to talk about the value of well-written copy, and not just on social, what writing elements you should focus on first to get started, and the level of influence that you can really build through your written word. So, Dylan, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate having you on the Lowdown.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, man. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I know that there's a ton of power in the written word, right? I mean, you can see it in history, right? Like just years and years, all the way back to the beginning of time. Like the written word has such a strong effect on people. And so I'm excited to have you here to really break it down. But before we get into all that, help this audience sort of know a little bit about you, what your background is, how you got into just writing as like a full-time gig, how you got into mortgage, right? Like help us understand a little bit about who Dylan is.
Yeah, so I started in the mortgage industry in 2019. I joined a small lender in Tampa, which is where I live, Tampa, Florida, as a processor, actually, on the operations side. And as you guys know, 2020 was a crazy year. So that little team grew very quickly. And before I knew it, I was managing a bunch of people on the operations side, which was really awesome and rewarding and fun. And we were growing that team. So that was really cool. And then from there, I got offered a position doing mortgage-backed security due diligence at another firm that was also based in Tampa. And so I did that for a couple of years till I got to the point where, in a past life, I had gotten a bachelor's degree in creative writing, and I never used it. There's no money in writing. And so I kind of shelved that dream for a while until I found LinkedIn and sort of discovered that there's this thriving community of businesses and people that are existing on LinkedIn and working together and building these relationships. And I realized, wow, there's a ton of potential here. And I missed the creative element of my life. And then I realized all these amazing copywriting techniques that exist in e-commerce and in other industries aren't really being carried over to the mortgage industry. It's lagging behind. And so, Connor, you're definitely a trailblazer there with your newsletter, and you're doing all these wonderful things, creating wonderful content that's helping people. I realized, wow, there's a lot of people out there that are really smart leaders, really have a lot of industry experience, industry knowledge, leadership styles that they can share, but they don't have the time to write. It's really time consuming. So I realized that I could act as, a magnifying glass almost to double click into the minds of these leaders and help them scale their ideas and influence.
Yeah, I really love that because first of all, I didn't know that you had like a background in mortgage prior to, starting the writing. So it shows like when you post on your own, there is an authority to what you write that shows that you have a deep understanding of the industry that really only someone who's worked in the industry could have. So that's really cool to discover about you today. But you're also spot on about the timing element of things. I frequently write on LinkedIn, and it can be very difficult some days to come up with something that doesn't, like if I can't pound something out in 10 minutes, I'm going back to years worth of other posts that I've had that I've put out there to just sort of repost something because, yeah, I mean, ultimately you could get stuck in your thoughts, get that writer's block, and really like it becomes a big waste of your time. Not a waste of your time, but it becomes a big use of your time to try and think of something to put out there. So, but leadership needs a voice in our industry. The more transparent we see our leaders, the more we hear from them, the more attractive they become. And so it's really cool that you have found that niche for yourself. So in that, what kind of, I mean, you have your degree as a creative writer. Where did that passion come from? Who do you study? What are the things about writing that really drives you?
I'm sorry, Connor, I lost you for just a second there. Could you repeat that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, just with your background in creative writing, like who are your influences? Who do you study? Where does all that come from?
Yeah, so there's actually one person specifically that kind of inspired me. His name is Nicholas Cole. He's a writer and a digital product creator on online. He officially branded digital writer and was a trailblazer in that area. And he wrote a book called The Art and Business of Writing Online. And I picked that book up and it really shifted my perspective from the perspective of everybody thinks that it's impossible to make money as a writer. And he uses that book effectively to deconstruct that belief system and to strip away those limiting beliefs. So that's really what inspired the whole journey for me getting started writing online. And so the whole premise of that book is if you should write every day, write every day and post every day, and get used to that, and ultimately your life will change. And so that's kind of the approach that I took, and he was right. Yeah, so that's really what started it. And it's a very different approach to writing from the perspective of doing it in the digital age and realizing that you have a split second to get somebody's attention, and people are skimming often, so you have to prioritize the format for that so that it's easy to effectively, people will skim and then decide based off of your headers, oh, is this something worth reading? And then they'll double back and reread if your headers are strong enough, right? So it's kind of this, he introduced me to the concept of writing in the digital age. So that was kind of the inspiration behind all of it.
So let's break that down a little further because I saw your post the other day and about writing for mobile and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you're kind of aware of the different rules that exist on mobile versus desktop. That you only have what is it 140 characters or the first two
Mm-hmm.
lines on a
Yeah.
LinkedIn post. But you're absolutely like you make a great point. If you don't put together a strong hook, something that's going to stop the scroll, you are a finger swipe away from being irrelevant, right? And our
Yeah.
attention spans today are so short, and to catch somebody's attention to get them to actually read something in a world of video and all of this, like it can be very difficult to craft a message that stops someone in their tracks. But I think that's a great call out. Now that's a great. I'm going to have to check out that book by Nicholas Cole. So thanks for sharing that tidbit. But what other elements do you see are important when it comes to digital writing? Because you referenced the newsletter, and that really sort of adopts kind of this click funnel mentality of value, 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 and then inviting in, building trust, and all of that. Just give it all away is so that people know who you are, and then they'll come find you, right? And like, how are you implementing that into your style, or how does that help you in what you do? I mean, do people find your content and say, "Hey, what can you do for me?" Or how does that work?
Yeah, that's right. And I would hope that that's the case because that's what I'm selling, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, is generating leads for your business through content creation, right? And whatever that business happens to be. Now, I have all this mortgage knowledge, so that's where I spend the majority or all of my time. I only write for mortgage professionals of one sort or the other. But yeah, so in terms of what elements I think are really important to focus on when you're writing online, as you said, the hook is really, it's super, super important. And there are a couple ways of thinking about that and approaching it. Primarily, not giving away what the post is about within the hook, right? So you have to incite curiosity, but also leave a gap there. So you're teasing at what the content is going to be, right? For example, I have a friend named Matthew Brown, and he recently wrote a post about this. And his example was, I have a client. This is the hook. I have a client that made $1 million using this certain type of post and named the specific post in the hook, right? And then he beta tested that, A/B tested it with, I have a client that generated $1 million in sales using this one type of hook, and left it without giving away the answer. And the differences between the results there were quite staggering, right? Because what you want to do is get somebody to click the dot, 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 see more. Because the more people click the see more, the more time people are spending on your posts, they're reading it, they're engaging with it, the more the algorithm is going to realize, hey, lots of eyeballs are on this post. It's doing well. Let's show it to more people, right? And so that's how you build virality, and that's how you grow. And ultimately, you create content that exits the mortgage industry even, and leave the echo chamber of mortgage, and once you go viral, and you can get hundreds of thousands or millions of impressions on a single post, right? So but yeah, so that's really a big focus, writing hooks that are engaging but without giving away the answer. I find that there's a couple things that really work well. One is using big numbers in the hook. So like if you're a loan officer and you're generating, if you're doing $12 million a month or whatever, right? Any kind of credibility or something like that you can use, that will make a splash. So I highly recommend it. Even if you are maybe doing less than that, considerably less, right? And you're in a position where, you want to write and maybe talk about how you had a bad month last month. Mm-hmm. I think being really honest and vulnerable in that way in your hook is number one, it's gonna create a lot of engagement, because if you say, I had my worst month ever last month, here are the lessons I learned. Mm-hmm. You're putting yourself in a position where you're vulnerable, you're building trust with people because you're being honest, and it comes off as, it humanizes you, right? And so that's one example of a hook I really like to use, is
So
big
Dylan,
numbers.
real quick, can I just ask a quick
Sure.
question on that? So
Yeah.
would you recommend, if someone were writing and their audience were to catch the attention of a potential borrower to build credibility of their expertise as a loan officer, would you recommend that they use volume numbers versus unit numbers? So depending on a market, somebody could fund 4 loans in a month and it could be 1.5 million in volume, or it could be 700,000 in volume. Just depends on where they are. But if they were doing, would you say use the volume number versus the units? Is that a more attractive number, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question, and I can tell that you've already put a lot of thought into this, because you're asking the right type of questions. My answer to that is credibility statements. That's what we're talking about effectively, is using statements that are going to build credibility with your reader. They're super, super important, but it doesn't matter what your credibility statement is, right? So let's say you're just getting started. It's your first month as a loan officer, but let's say that you got into this because you watched your younger brother struggle with buying their first home. It was a difficult experience, and you want to make sure that him and everyone in your family doesn't ever have to go through that again, because they're going to be able to work with you now, right? That can be your credibility statement. It doesn't have to be, look how great I am. It can be, I'm really passionate about helping people buy their first home. Whatever it is, right? But you do have to have that credibility statement, because if you're writing a piece, effectively, if you're writing good content, it's going to reach people that don't know who you are. And so you need to give them that instant vision of who you are and have an understanding, right? So having a sentence like, I'm really passionate about X, or I did, whatever amount of units or whatever amount of volume last month. The statement itself doesn't matter too much, because it's context. You're giving immediate context. If somebody doesn't know who you are and they click to see more, now they do, right? Because you're a loan officer who's done this, or who's passionate about this, or whatever it happens to be. So the truth is, whether it's units or volume or passion or whatever it happens to be, it doesn't matter, as long as you have that credibility statement.
That's great.
Yeah, great question.
And I know you mentioned Matthew Brown.
Yes.
I'm also familiar with like Matt Barker, Justin Welsh. I mean, who are some other people that an aspiring writer / LO could really study that would be useful to help them up their skills?
Yeah, I like Justin Welsh. He's great. I really like the inspiring element of that. But yeah, in terms of consuming content, I don't think I'm the right person to ask, because my rule is I need to spend more time creating than consuming. And
Okay.
so I spend as little time as possible trying to consume. There are maybe a handful of people that I've studied closely, which we've already discussed, like Nicholas Cole and Matthew Brown. And even somebody named Daniel Bustamante. These are all guys that are kind of in the same circle effectively. And I've done a deep dive on all their work, and that's kind of who I stay within a small little pocket.
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you suggest a particular kind of framework? I know there's and I don't remember what all the acronyms stand for, but you've got your story branding, you've got your AIDA, you've got these different types of kind of frameworks to work within copywriting. Is there anything that you suggest with that, or is it just sort of write what works for you, and then make sure you go back and add in these elements that help make them more attractive to the reader?
Yeah. So from the perspective of frameworks, with individual posts, there's a couple rules that I like to follow. One is there was a South Park episode, or not episode, sorry. The creators of South Park wrote about or spoke about effectively never having a story that has a and then. It should always be but because or therefore or whatever, right? You end up in a situation where every sentence leads you to the next sentence, and you're never having that and then where you're effectively connecting two pieces together. So that's one rule that I try to apply as a framework to all my writing. Another framework that I try to apply is more generally from the content creation perspective. I try to create one piece of content within one of 5 different buckets every single week. So the first is founder mission, in this case, your mission, the LO's mission. What kind of problems have you set out to solve in the world? Who are you trying to help and why? The second is trends. So what industry trends are you seeing that you can speak to? And then the third is futurism. So, where do you think the industry is going and how do you feel about it? The fourth is education. So what kind of problems are your target readers struggling with, and what frameworks can you can share that will help them? And then the last one is stories. So whether that's client success stories or personal journey stories, that really resonates with people and allows you to, allows them to get to know you. And so I create content within one of those buckets at least once a week. So that's 5 pieces of content at a minimum. And then, you can use your weekends to write some silly things if you want that aren't, focused on the business and
Yeah,
maybe
talk about your first
more
car or
lighthearted.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
So I hear what you're saying, and I interpret a lot of it from a recruiting perspective because that's just what I do in this industry. I don't fund loans, and so but I work with a lot of branch managers that also want to use content as a way to attract potential recruits and start conversations there. Have you found that to be an effective use of the writing skill, or what advice could you give to someone that wants to approach writing from I want to elicit a response from somebody who might want to come work for me sort of approach?
Mm. Yeah, smart thinking. So it's definitely an area that there's a lot of attention that's happening, at least in my world right now, with regards to how can we build our teams up. And that is one of the best ways to do it, in my opinion. And the truth is that every loan officer out there wants to know how you can help them, what's different about your company, and how you can ultimately unlock their future vision, right? Whatever outcome they're trying to get. So creating a narrative, crafting a narrative around those 3 pieces is really fundamental. And so that goes back to identifying what makes your company different, right? What are your differentiators? Where you work and telling that story from a content perspective, right? So, if you bootstrap the company yourself and you're the CEO now, or, whatever it happens to be, and you've got this wonderful story of, sleeping on the couch or in your office, right? Because you couldn't afford an apartment, whatever. That's obviously an extreme example, but anything that any kind of story like that you can tell will communicate to people what kind of person you are and what kind of leadership style you have, right? And so it's all about crafting that narrative and telling stories that people connect with, because people want to hear from other people. They don't want to hear from brands, right? So you can call and say, I'm from XYZ company, but unless you have a really strong company brand behind you, what really is going to matter when you have that call is if you call them and they already know who you are because they read about your story, right? Or You shared this one time, you had a difficult conversation with somebody and you handled it poorly and you were honest about that and you write about your lessons learned. That's a really powerful way to show I'm the kind of leader that, number one, listens, and number two, is growing and evolving, and I want to be a better leader, right? So those kind of things, I think it really resonates with people. And so much of it, of going to a new place for work, is culture fit, right? Is it going to be a good fit? Am I going to want to work for this person? And if you can create a relationship with somebody and they've seen your content and they feel like they know you before you get on the phone, I think it's a done deal a lot of the time. They're going
Yeah.
to take your call when they might not take somebody else's.
I appreciate that call out. I mean, I've thought it for years. I think there's still such a opportunity for leaders, even at the local level, branch managers, to be more vocal on social media as a way to just build familiarity with who they are, with their leadership brand, basically. The value propositions of your company should really support what you do and not be the only thing that you talk about. And that's where I feel I see a lot of kind of branch managers fall into a bit of a lull, right? And they're not skilled at expressing themselves in that way. They don't know the right things to say or the stories to tell, and so there's a fallback option. So I see that the writing piece is a really good hack to that, to really get it ahead of who are you and do I even want to work with you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got a little tongue-tied there. But listen, Dylan, I really appreciate you joining. I want to wrap this up real quick. Is there just one single piece of advice that you would give someone who really wants to get started in writing, where they should start and what skill they should perfect first?
Yeah, I would say the biggest upgrade that you can do to any writing is formatting. And so if you're starting off, avoid blocks of text at all costs. So every sentence should have a line break. And I mean that, every single sentence, because like we said earlier, we're skimming. And so if you can write short, punchy sentences and you've got line breaks between all of them, your message is going to get across a lot faster and a lot better. And there's no cognitive load when a reader finds your work, right? Versus if it's a big block of text, it feels like effort to read that. And we want to make it as effortless as possible. And I think that's the single biggest unlock that anybody can implement. It's super, super simple, straightforward. Break up your formatting, and then your story will come through a lot clearer.
Love it, man. Well, I appreciate you hopping on with me on the lowdown and sharing all this. I think there's so much value to what you do, and it's just another skill that someone who's interested in pursuing, if they can unlock it, it can do some really great things for them. So, Dylan, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Connor. Talk soon.